You know, when it comes to Shabbos, there's a very interesting halacha that we find in the Rambam. But in order to understand and appreciate the Rambam, let me give you a little bit of a background. The halacha is that there are certain averos chas v'shalom that if a person commits them accidentally, they have to bring a carbon, they have to bring a sacrifice, they have to bring a chatas. That's the general principle. So again, not for all averos, but many averos have that under certain qualifications and so on. A person has to bring a chatas. Now the ruling is that if a person does, many different averos, and each one is worthy of being of obligating him in a carbon, then he has to bring those amount of carbonas. The Rambam says an interesting Kiddush. The Rambam says we know that a sin that a person could commit, again accidentally, that would obligate a chatas, that would obligate a carbon, is to desecrate Shabbos. So the Rambam says a Kiddush. The Rambam says if, let's say, on one Shabbos the person accidentally, without realizing, he forgot it's Shabbos, he didn't realize that this is prohibited, and he plows his field. Okay, so that now he's obligated a chatas. Let's say the following Shabbos, same scenario happens again. He forgets it's Shabbos, he forgets that plowing is prohibited, and he plows the field again. So does that require two sacrifices, or is that only one sacrifice? On a simple level, we would certainly say that would require two sacrifices. Why? Because one was one Shabbos, and the other one was a week later, a different Shabbos. These are different days, different days on the calendar, different times. There's a whole week in between. It was a separate experience. It was a separate violation. It was a separate aveira. So it would require a different chatas. That's what you would think. The Rambam in Hilchos Shkagas says not like that. The Rambam in Hilchos Shkagas tells us an interesting halacha that if a person, again, in this scenario, commits a malacha, violates a prohibition on one Shabbos, and repeats that again the following week, and the next week and the next week, all you need is one chatas. All you need is one carbon, and it takes care of all of it. In other words, the Rambam is viewing, interestingly enough, is that despite the fact that on the days of the calendar, so to speak, these are different days. One was Aleph Tammuz, and the other one was Zayin Tammuz, and it's different days of the week. Nevertheless, Shabbos is Shabbos, and the fact that one sin was committed, on these Shabbos, even though there's weeks in between, that's considered to be one sin, one violation, as if it was one Shabbos, and all you have to bring is one chatas. That's the Rambam. Again, the source of it, where he comes from, what Gemaras he's coming from, is not for now. But every single thing in halacha is telling us something, is reverberating with a spiritual truth as well. What does this tell us about Shabbos? What does this tell us about Shabbos? And the answer is, what this reveals to us about Shabbos is the following idea. You know what Shabbos is? Shabbos is not just a day of the week, the seventh day of the week, within which we commemorate the fact that Hashem created the world. If that's what Shabbos is, well, this seventh day is very different than the next week's seventh day. Those are different Shabboses. And why would the Rambam say that it's counted as if the sin was committed in consecutive times in one time period? The answer is that's what Shabbos is superficially. But really what Shabbos is that the seventh day of the week, the soul returns to the origin of all things. The soul returns to its creator. The soul is reattached to the single place that everything comes from, which is in God's presence. That's what Shabbos is. So this is 6 days of the week. Where do we find ourselves? All over the place. You could be in New York. You could be in Vermont. You could be in Venezuela. You could be all over the place during the 6 days of the week. But there is one location that every Shabbos you return to. And the location that every single Shabbos you return to is in the presence of Hashem Yisbarach. That's the place that we're all brought to on Shabbos. And the time that we're brought to on Shabbos is the moment before the Rebbeinu Shalom created this whole complicated universe. The moment, just like there was a moment in time before creation where all there was the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's the time, and that's the place that the Jewish soul is transported to every single Shabbos. So even though on the outside, you look at your calendar, this Shabbos is a different day than the next Shabbos, and the next Shabbos is a different day than the following Shabbos, and you could find yourself in different places. This Shabbos you're in New York, the next Shabbos you're in New Jersey. So it's all different places and different times. But what the Rambam is revealing to us is that in the depth of the soul, every single Shabbos brings you back to the same place and the same time. And every single Shabbos you find yourself in the same place and the same time as all other previous Shabbos and all future Shabbos. It's all the same place and the same time. The time is when before the complexity of this world, where all there was the Rabbanu Shalom, and the place is also the same place right in front of God's presence. It's the same place and the same time. That's what Shabbos does. It's a mechanism in which we all returning to that single point, and that's why anything a person does in any given Shabbos, it's considered to be in halacha, according to the Rambam. It's considered to be the same time and the same place. And although it might look like he plowed his field in New York on the 1st of Tammuz, and then he plowed his field again in New Jersey on Zion Tammuz, that's just on the outside. On the inside, this Shabbos and that Shabbos was the same place and the same time. And because it was in terms of the soul, the same place and the same time, it was one big plowing, and all you need is one chatas for that. That's the secret of Shabbos that's being revealed to us in this halacha. Hashem should bless us that reality of Shabbos should reverberate within ourselves in an extreme way, to the point of where even when we find ourselves in New York and New Jersey and Venezuela and Vermont and all the different places in the world, we should still feel that connection, that sense of being at home and being secure in Hashem's embrace, because ultimately what Shabbos reveals to us is that from the beginning of time to the end of time, to a certain degree, nothing's changed. And from just like before creation, all there was the Rabbanu Shalom, and all we were just standing in His presence. To a certain degree, nothing's changed, and that remains the constant throughout all our lives. We should be zeichet to experience that light of Shabbos. Amen.